So our agenda this morning will be securing the phone system itself. We're going to cover topics that allow us to do that and that help us to make the system more stable and more protected from outside attacks. So we're going to talk about maintaining user profiles. We're going to be talking about managing voicemail profiles as well. We're then going to move on to some current solutions in terms of security that Avaya has available. Specifically, we're going to be talking about a protocol called SIP, S-I-P, which is basically a cloud protocol. So when we talk about the cloud, that's the kind of protocol that we're referring to there. And finally, we're going to spend some time at the end of our time today having a Q&A session. So if you should have anything that comes along during our time this morning that's of interest or a concern to you, or anything you'd like further detail, then just go ahead and get a question in. There's a tool at the bottom of the webinar there that you can type out a question and send it over. And just in an effort to take to be considerate of everyone's time this morning, we're probably going to save those questions toward the end so that we can get through the material and the content this morning, and we'll have some Q&A at the end of our time together. All right. So when we talk about phone system security, we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson here, and our format this morning is going to be a little bit of past, present, future, right? So we're gonna touch on the past and things that have brought us to where we are presently in terms of security, and then we'll talk a little bit more at the close of our time about things moving forward, what security is going to look like here in the near future. So what is toll fraud? I'm sure folks have heard about that before. Some of you may know more about it than others, and that's what we're going to spend some time here at the beginning discussing. Simply put, toll fraud is essentially a phone system that has been breached or compromised or accessed by an unauthorized third party, or what we commonly refer to as a hacker, right? So a hacker is able to get into your phone system, and they will acquire your long distance services, and they will then take those long distance minutes and sell them on the black market. And it really only takes them a few hours before hundreds of calls can be made, and suddenly we've got a phone bill that's 4, 5, even 6 digits in terms of fees and bills that get racked up. So it's not a good situation, obviously. The idea of hacking into a phone system is a bit of a technology subculture. These hackers are very sophisticated and robust in terms of their knowledge. They definitely spend time studying and experimenting and exploring telecommunication systems. And they know how to reverse engineer these systems. They know how to reroute long distance calls from your phone system to any location in the world. So later on this morning, we're going to discuss further detail of what it is that hackers do. And more importantly, we're going to touch on some items that Agility does as a business partner in order to run interference on those third parties. So here we have a real world scenario of toll fraud. This was a architecture firm in the state of Georgia back in March of 2014, and we can see that all it took was one weekend, and this company came back on a Monday, and their phone bill for that just 2-day time period was over $160,000. So this was an article from the New York Times. I have that link should anyone want to read this in its entirety. It's a pretty interesting article that details the fact that small and medium businesses in the United States are primarily the largely impacted victims of toll fraud, and that's largely due to the financial impact that it has. So when a small or medium business is a victim and they get a phone bill in the 6-digit range, like this company in Georgia did, then they're going to be spending a lot of time having disputes with their phone company, and a lot of times, unfortunately, during those dispute periods, there's going to be problems in terms of keeping their communication systems online from a financial standpoint. So naturally, the next question that comes to mind for folks is, how do we stop toll fraud? Well, in order to understand how we're going to stop it, we do need to spend some time discussing how it happens. So everybody's business, everybody's company has a main phone number, right? Here at Agility, we have a main phone number. Your location has a main phone number, and that phone number is tied to your phone system. That phone system then hands out extension numbers to all of your employees, For the most part, everyone's got their own number and a phone that sits at their desk. Well, along with that extension number is a voicemail box, right? Everyone's got messages that they need to acquire. Well, the voicemail is actually a chief point of vulnerability. And the reason for that is voicemail has a passcode which provides the end user to access into the phone system itself. It's designed that way. It's what we want. We want to be able to have our messages stored on our phones and to be able to access them whenever we need to. So the voicemail system itself is designed also for users to acquire their messages when they're away from the desk, even more so when they're outside the office. So hackers can sometimes get into your system by figuring out or obtaining these passcodes used by employees, and just whenever employees use them to access their voicemail in a very harmless manner. However, when phone systems have weak passcodes, if you have a password that is the same as your extension number, or if you have repeated digits or sequential digits, hopefully nobody out there is using 1, 2, 3, 4 as a password anymore. But once a hacker figures out that password, there's really nothing internally in a phone system that can stop them from racking up huge bills. A favorite tactic, as we saw on that New York Times article previously, is for hackers to try to take advantage of these things over a weekend when there's no one around to really notice. A couple more real-world examples here just to give you guys a taste of things that folks have experienced out there. According to the FBI, the perpetrators of toll fraud, they are members of highly organized syndicates, and they can operate from anywhere in the world. In 2009, there was a toll fraud ring that hired a team of hackers out of the Philippines to target phone systems inside the continental U.S., and they were able to steal 12 million minutes of long-distance telephone time. So, law enforcement in the United States did break that up. Unfortunately, it was not before $55 million worth of fraudulent charges were charged, across dozens of companies. And here, I hope I've made it obvious. I hope I've highlighted it well enough that you can see, according to the FBI article here, what was the culprit? Weak passwords. Time and time again, we see weak passwords being a major point of vulnerability for phone systems. So naturally, business owners, network administrators, engineers such as myself, we want to know what it is that can be done. We are going to spend the remainder of our time discussing best practice methods, methods that are used by the telephony industry at large, but we're also going to talk about some ways that agility goes above and beyond those methods. We've already discussed the scary parts of phone system breach, talked about some toll fraud and some numbers that are out there in terms of consequences and impacts of a phone system breach. Now we're going to touch on the things that we can do to prevent those. We want to be proactive in this manner, right? So let's first discuss the IP office itself. We're going to look at some IP office security features. So I have a list here of just some basic things that we do in terms of engineering here at Agility, as well as programmers in general that touch an IP office phone system. So you can see here I've highlighted a portion of a configuration menu from the IP office's interface. This is an option here that allows us as engineers to control whether or not voice traffic is even authorized to leave the phone system in the first place. This is a very simple little option where we can just uncheck a box, and if this becomes a concern for a network administrator, this is the location where we can come into the phone system and easily disable what's called off-net forwarding or off-net transferring, right? So there's also a couple other items here. Short codes are basically a string of characters that we can configure and we can customize to perform a variety of features, and several of those features are security-based. They are call handling based, so we can manage and customize what happens to specific phone numbers and specific businesses when they call into your system. The third item there are two different call tables. One call table handles incoming calls. The other table handles outgoing calls. These are again security features that are native to the IP office itself, and those call tables allow us essentially just another layer of customization in terms of how we can handle calls that are entering and leaving the phone system. So it's important to remember, phones have been a daily part of our lives for a long time, right? They sometimes get treated in a cavalier manner, and it's important to remember that phone systems these days really are computer systems. They have their own internal operating systems, and they need to be considered in terms of network attached devices. They need to be accounted for, and they need to be protected. So here at Agility, our best practices that we have in place, we actually implement this for all of our installations as well as systems that we maintain. So the IP Office out of the box has several default user accounts and passwords for those accounts. So most business partners, folks outside of the Agility world, I've worked for several other business partners that have made their practices of logging into the system and simply changing the passwords on these accounts and doing nothing more. Well, at Agility, we actually will go into the system and we take those accounts and we disable them entirely. So even if a hacker is familiar with default usernames and default passwords, and they try to use those on an Agility customer, they're not going to work even if they're accurate. Even if those credentials are correct, the account is going to be disabled entirely, so it's not even going to be an option for them. So that's definitely something that Agility does that goes a step further in terms of security. So we disable those accounts entirely. In addition, we can work in conjunction with any IT professional, whether that's an administrator in-house that you have or a third party that you've authorized to work alongside and manage your network. We can work in conjunction with that person or that team to design a customized service user account for whoever might need one. So that way your system can easily be accessed and managed locally. So you can always make changes to your system and you know exactly who it is that made those changes. The phone system does have a built-in audit trail, so you can access that audit trail and it will tell you the time and date, what changes were made, and the user account that made the change. So it's a good little tool to have in terms of reviewing history. So for those of you that are familiar with using the IP Office Map Manager application, this is what the interface looks like. This is a user menu from inside the application. Specifically here, we're looking at a user's profile that allows you to set a login code for their extension number. So this step here, this login code, is becoming increasingly crucial. I mean, obviously, we're all fans of passwords and keeping things safe. However, this is, as I said, increasingly crucial due to the fact that a lot of our technologies in the enterprise world are becoming increasingly cloud-based, right? We've seen it with things like Office 365, where 10 years ago, we used to have all these applications installed directly on our computers, from a CD or a USB drive. But now we're logging into our Office 365 accounts and we're using those applications from a cloud platform. Well, the same is true for phones, right? Later this morning, we're going to touch on a cloud-based security device called a session border controller that actually makes this password here even more secure and even more important, because phones these days are registering to phone systems that are actually cloud-based, that are no longer on-premise. So the password that we're looking at right here is very crucial in terms of security. It's also important to note that engineers such as myself, we can get into the phone system and we can increase the required complexity of these user level passwords. So that's something that we can adjust at a global or a system level, which will prevent easily guessed passwords from even becoming part of the system. So we just looked at a user profile. This is a very similar page. Instead of setting a password for the extension, this is a password that we need to set for the voicemail box. So just like we mentioned earlier this morning, voicemail being a chief point of vulnerability for the system, as system administrators and IT professionals, we need to ensure that users are being trained, the users are being managed on how to appropriately handle their voicemail passwords, especially those folks that are going to be checking messages remotely. So there's always different options, just like with the user password, that we can set this particular one to be at a certain level, a mandated level of complexity. Therefore, we keep those simple or those weak passwords from even being part of our system. So that's a little bit of our first section this morning. Where we talked about some toll fraud and some historical items regarding system security. So just to review, we've talked about user profile passwords and voicemail passwords and what we can do to manage those. It talked a little bit about toll fraud, what it is, how it happens, and what we can do to be ready for it, right? So in the way of system design here at Agility, we can always be mindful of complexity settings and disabling those accounts that come into the system by default right out of the box. So good things to be aware of. Now let's move on to our next topic, which is going to be session border controllers. So this is a device that I described earlier, basically a security device for cloud traffic, and it's definitely a device that's finding itself at the forefront of telephony security conversations. It's very very robust and very advanced in terms of what it can do for your system and for your network security. So just to give you an idea, session border controller is simply referred to sometimes as an SBC. This is certainly not a Avaya product or an exclusive term to Avaya. This is a device that can be provided by a business partner like Agility. It can also be vendor provided. AT&T has session border controllers, things like that. The session border controller, you can see there's a real world depiction down there, illustration showing an enterprise environment with employees and network devices such as laptops, printers, certainly telephones, things of that nature. Outside the enterprise environment, we see a teleworker, a guy sitting at home using his networked computer and his networked telephone. Unfortunately, we also see a hacker out there using a rogue device to do the same thing as a teleworker, essentially. So the difference there is what's being agreed upon and what's being permitted by that SBC. And you can see the session border controller sitting right there in between the enterprise environment and the outside world or the public internet. So the unauthorized access of the unauthorized network traffic is really where the SBC becomes a vital piece of your network topology. So this is just a little diagram showing the overview of what it is that the SBC does compared to other items that folks have traditionally relied upon in terms of network security. So the SBC provides security for your SIP trunks. It's going to prevent you from being a victim of toll fraud. It's going to provide security for your SIP clients or your cloud phones, your end devices. Phones that are registering back to the phone system will do so by authenticating through the policies and the rules that are established inside the session border controller. The SBC also allows a wonderful little thing that we've all gotten used to called BYOD, or bring your own device, and we'll touch more on that when we get to the new things that are coming out from Avaya later this month, actually here this month of May. And the SBC also allows remote workers. As we saw on the previous slide, we've got that teleworker there in that illustration. That teleworker is actually authenticating back to the call server without a VPN connection. It's doing all this communication because of the parameters that are established inside the session border controller. So just another diagram here to show you where the SBC resides in terms of its place on the network. The SBC is essentially establishing a border, a border against the outside network, the public internet, so to speak, and a border against your network inside at your business. So it's essentially like a guardian that stands at the edge of your enterprise environment, and it decides who's allowed to come in and who's not. We've all been to the airport. Obviously, we can use this as a pretty accurate analogy. We've all gone to the airport, and eventually you're going to get stopped at the airport. You're going to be inspected. You're going to be patted down. We all get to go through the wonderful metal detector. This is essentially what the SBC is doing in terms of network traffic. A lot of firewalls and routers don't really do this deep packet inspection that the SBC is designed to do. So firewalls and administrator applications aren't going to modify or inspect any packets that are coming through it. The SBC does. It's got a lot of specific items that it's looking for from your SIP provider, from domain names, different types of protocols that it can flag and things of that nature. So why is it that a session border controller is better than a firewall? It's a good question. So you can see here we have a very typical or a very common type of hacking attempt, which is called a man-in-the-middle attack. So a man-in-the-middle attack is when a hacker or a third party can gain access to your firewall. And once they're inside that firewall, they're basically, they're loving life. They can see anything that they want to see. The packets are not encrypted. They can see pictures that you're sending. They can read emails. They've got their hands on everything. So without a session border controller, there are specific ports on your firewall and on your network that are open to the internet. They're open to anybody who comes along scanning with a port scanner looking for vulnerabilities. So in terms of the phone system, there's really not any cloud-based or SIP security that's native to the phone system. It's just not part of what the phone system is designed to do. The phone systems are essentially just designed to hand off the traffic. They take traffic from the provider and they hand it off to an end user's phone or a soft phone or an application, any number of places for that traffic to end. It's also important to remember that hackers are not necessarily out there all the time doing this work themselves, right? They have programs and port scanners and bots that can do their bidding for them. They don't necessarily have to be actively involved, but as soon as they find a system with a weakness, you can believe that they're going to take an interest and they're going to look at that more closely and try to take advantage. Now, the IP office can blacklist certain IP addresses if it's got a number of failed attempts from someone trying to gain access to the network. Then they will blacklist an IP address. However, hackers are, they're not going to be stopped by something that simple. They're clever. They're going to figure out a way around that. So a firewall can sometimes inspect packets and take a look at what's going on there, but it's not going to do a deep packet inspection like a session border controller will. And we'll talk about further details that the SBC allows us to take advantage of. So this is a better design here. The last slide showed us a man-in-the-middle attack because the hacker, the third party, was able to get into a firewall and see all the traffic going from one firewall to another, just going back and forth between two network routers. Here, we've got an SBC in place. You can see that firewall is sitting behind the SBC. The phone system is sitting behind the SBC. And the only thing that the hacker is going to be able to see is the session border controller. It's not able to see anything internally because the SBC provides something called topology hiding. It's a bit technical, but basically it's going to take anything inside the SBC's traffic and it's going to make it look like something different. It's not going to make it so obvious to where the hackers can see things like usernames or applications that are being used, things that they would normally be able to take advantage of. So here we just basically have the SBC providing security while it hides the trusted network traffic from the outside world by establishing a border between the two networks. Pictured here is a great native tool that is built into the SBC. Here at Agility, we support hundreds of clients, hundreds of SIP clients, and this is just an example of one of the SBC tools that we used on one occasion to capture over 200 fake SIP attempts, fake cloud registration attempts in 5 seconds. This is just the entire trace was much larger than this. This here that we are able to see on one screen is about 1 second worth of fake attempts. And you can see all the responses from the session border controller, how it did not allow these devices to register to the system for a variety of reasons, either unauthorized password credentials or an incorrect domain name. There's a variety of things that you can set in the session border controller that will filter out things and make sure those things do not get authenticated to the system. So again, this is just a 5 second screen capture and about 200 different attempts that were not authorized by the session border controller. So definitely did its job in that situation. So just to summarize session border controllers, we take advantage of toll fraud protection. We've got the option to set up teleworkers, mobile folks that want to take advantage of their own workspace at home. They can do that. We've got the idea of bringing your own device to the phone system itself, using a personal device as a business phone. And then we've got that idea of internal network protection, where we've basically got, like we made that analogy with the airport, the airport inspection that goes on that allows the traffic that you want to come through, and everything else is filtered out. Okay. So we started this morning with some historical items on the way of toll fraud, and we've moved on to what's currently going on with session border controllers. And now we want to talk about some things in terms of the immediate future here and where we see voice security going. And some of those changes are actually happening here this month. The month of May is when Avaya, as a company, is releasing their newest software version, which is going to be release 11. And it's definitely worth noting that this software release was designed from the top down as a teleworker and a mobile presence platform. This has definitely been designed with some intentionality behind it. And one of the main features of that is something that Avaya is calling the Equinox experience. So previously, Avaya had a lot of different types of clients, and they all behaved and looked differently. There was, 1X Mobile was the mobility device for iOS and Android. There was a Windows desktop client, Avaya Communicator, and there was even a video soft phone for Mac. So all of these prior clients moving forward are going to collapse down into what's called Equinox for IP Office Release 11. And this is an effort to streamline all these clients into a singular portal for ease and familiarity. And we'll take a look at that on our next slide. It is worth noting there, Avaya Communicator for Web is going to continue as its own web-based RTC, which is a real-time communication client or a thin client. So Equinox, here is the interface. And the reason we're talking about these things, why are we talking about this kind of stuff during security, right? Yeah, this is definitely the next step or the next phase of communication from Avaya specifically. And because communication is constantly changing and the industry is moving more towards RTC or real-time communication, then we're going to find ourselves in a discussion once again about securing the communication between our end users and their devices. And this is once again why things like SBCs are becoming such a crucial part of telephony security moving forward, right? So the Equinox experience here you can see is a centralized interface that regardless of your device, whether you're comfortable with Android, with iOS, Windows, it doesn't matter. The convenience of Equinox is what we discussed earlier, BYOD, bring your own device. The Equinox experience is going to look exactly the same regardless of what type of device is housing the client. So that's going to be a matter of convenience, I would think, going forward. And this is some further detail here about Equinox and where it's come from. I know we're getting a little bit high on time here, so I want to make sure that anybody that does have some questions has an opportunity to throw those out there. Anybody that has any further interest in talking about Equinox, we can certainly do that. We can look at the history here of the different ways that Equinox is going to be moving forward. Zang Spaces was something that was used in the past to provide team collaboration. Web conferencing was something that went on via 1X portal, and the Equinox meetings online were a web or video hybrid. Some of you may have experienced that as something called Scopia from Avaya, but that's also going to be moved on to the Avaya Equinox experience. And we've got some information here on how all that stuff is going to work in terms of an on-premise deployment, a cloud-based deployment, cloud designs using Equinox, and how all of that's going to be interfacing together. Equinox client does have some good features. The Zang Spaces team collaboration is a free Avaya cloud service that comes with Equinox. It does have an Outlook plugin, which is always good. Everybody likes to manage their communications from one screen if possible, and Equinox certainly tries to make that effort possible. So in terms of security, I want to tie this all back to our topic at hand, which is certainly network security and phone system security. We talked previously about some deployment scenarios for Equinox, and you can see here in the top right corner, emanating from the Avaya Cloud, we have Zang Spaces capabilities as well as Spaces online meetings, all the things that happen on the customer's premise in terms of the phone system there. You see that CPE, that's the phone system that the Equinox client itself can connect to using two different types of communication. We've got SIP and REST API protocol. So essentially, I'm showing this to you guys to let you know that all these clients are talking back and forth, cross-platform and cross-location, due to the fact that these protocols are being secured. and they're being secured by an SBC. So I just really want to drive that point home. I know I might be beating a dead horse there, but the SBC is a very vital part of what's going to be happening to phone system security, collaboration, real-time communication, specifically web RTC, which is what Equinox is a client to be used for, is web-based real-time communication. Something I know we're all probably pretty familiar with, but it's important to remember why those things work and how they're functioning in the background. This is a look at the Equinox client in terms of a live video screen, a live video session that you can see there. And on the right-hand side is the interface. So along with Equinox, we do have some exciting new products coming out from Avaya. The phone system, or the phone series, is called the J series that's coming out, and they do have some Wi-Fi capable phones. So they're going to be gigabit clients, and they'll have dual port capabilities, and traditional gigabit phones are going to be a little bit of a thing of the past, because these phones are going to be taking communication to the next level, especially a device like this one we have here, the Avaya Vantage, which is also Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capable. The screen is all glass. We don't have any manual buttons on this device at all. It's got a pretty slick acoustic mic and a speaker. So all of these devices are being authenticated and supported in the background in terms of security due to the cloud-based traffic that's being managed on the phone system by the session border controller, and all of those settings that you can discuss with your engineer during a time of setup. So that's what I have for you guys this morning, just a little bit of a past, present, and future breakdown of phone system security, what we can do to manage it. You guys will be getting a survey regarding today's presentation, so please let us know what you thought, and feel free to advise us of any topics in the future that might be of interest to you. And I think we'll go ahead and open things up to question and answer time now. If anybody has anything, I do see at least one question in here. Give me just 1 second to get this expanded a little bit. I'm having some trouble seeing it. So yes, there will be recorded copies of this webinar once it's over, and we'll send those out to you guys. It's also going to be available on our Agility YouTube channel. So you guys can always go to YouTube and search for Agility Communications Group, and we do have a pretty thorough channel on there. It's got lots of different topics. So good question there. So yes, Lee, we are a service provider that handles the question here that I'm answering is Agility a service provider that handles this? And in terms of this, I assume Lee is asking about the session border controller. Yes, we definitely offer session border controllers. We do have a cloud-based offering that we refer to as ONTAP, and you can see that on the screen here, the Agility ONTAP cloud-based offering. And we definitely would love to talk to you about that. That's something that we manage from our co-location, and we can handle the service as well as the setup and maintenance of the session border controller. So another question here is, are the J series phones only supported on release 11? So the J series phones are a little bit of a newer technology, and I want to make sure and get you a good answer on that. I'm not certain as to whether or not they're only available on release 11. So let me take that question to our team and get back to you. I believe that was Garland that asked that question. Let me move on to the next question here. Question next is, if clients are connecting through a VPN, is an SBC still recommended? Yes, that's something that can still modify and support your SIP traffic in terms of security. So we do have clients that will connect back to our ONTAP solution via a VPN connection, and their traffic and their clients still register back to the system, sometimes in terms of a failover. So it's still a good idea to have an SBC in place for that security purpose. So yes, good question. All right, well, I don't see any other questions rolling in. I do want to go back here to our first slide, and I'll make sure you guys can see my email address just in case you guys have any questions. I can certainly send out any specific answers to some scenarios that anybody has. So there's my information, just acrow@agilitycg.com. So feel free to guys to shoot me any questions that we didn't get to during our session this morning. And again, you'll be getting that survey. So I appreciate you guys being here this morning. Have a wonderful day.